Number 1. The Lightning Storm. I remember my first job as a teenager. I was 16 years old, and I got myself a job in town. I was working in a used video game store. I got the job because I was trying to save up money to buy my first car. So, obviously, I had to walk to and from work every day. This happened in the late fall, so it got dark pretty early. The store stayed open until 10 p.m., and I worked the closing shift. It wasn't too hard to get the store closed down and then get out the door. Usually I would be on my way around 10:30. On this night, I noticed when I left the store that it was unusually warm for this time of year. As I locked the door, I discovered why. A bright shock of lightning lit up the entire area. There was a storm on its way. In addition to the lightning, there was also some very strong winds that threatened to blow me over more than once. It was inconvenient for walking, but I actually liked it. It was atmospheric. I grew up in one of those really small towns that pretty much closed up by 9 p.m. So by the time I was on my way, I truly felt very alone. To get to my house, I had to walk through town. Then, I had to take a turn into an old neighborhood. There weren't many houses in there anymore. Many of them had been torn down long before I was born. There was a large wooded area on the left side of the street. Also, there were no street lamps, so it was very, very dark in the woods. I have to admit that several times I was very nervous as I was walking by that area. The stormy night didn't make it any better. It hadn't started raining yet, but I had been witness to an amazing lightning show while walking home. The wind was loud too. It had to be blowing at over 20 miles per hour. Despite the loud blowing of the wind, I could have sworn I heard someone walking in the wooded area. It was very scary, and I wasn't really one to be scared of much. I tried to tell myself it was just an animal, but that was hardly comforting. Even if it was an animal, it seemed like it was following me along the street. You know how you convince yourself that something is happening, even if it really isn't? And when you do this, you become preoccupied with the thought. It then snowballs into a nerve-wracking episode. Well, this was what was exactly happening to me. And I knew it. It was then that I was looking over at the woods that finally one of those area-brightening bolts of lightning lit up the entire woods. And I saw a guy standing half behind one of the trees, holding what looked like a baseball bat. It was a quick flash of light, and all that I saw was an outline. After the lightning crack, it was even darker than it was before. I felt a twinge of pain in my eyes. I had to squint. When the thunder stopped rolling, I then distinctly heard the sound of footsteps on the pavement. I freaked. Anyone would have. I ran down the street at top speed. The entire time, I heard the footsteps of the guy coming after me. That just spurred me on to run faster. I turned on my street and was delighted to see that the living room light in my house was on. That meant someone was up. I made it to the house and grabbed the doorknob. I was fully expecting to be grabbed when I held it. However, I was able to get into the house and close and lock the door before anything happened. My little brother was sitting on the couch. I told him to call the police. I looked out the door window, and at first I didn't see anything. There was another bolt of lightning, and I saw the shadow of the man standing out in the middle of the street, looking at my house. By the next flash of lightning, though, he was gone. I don't know who he was, or what he wanted. I figured he wasn't after me specifically. It could have been anyone walking along the street, but it scared me half to death. Number 2. The windstorm. In the Great Lakes area in Illinois, and I'm sure other places around the lakes, we tend to get some really bad windstorms in November. I'm not really completely sure why, but I guess that's not important. On this particular day, I was on my way home from work. I stopped at the grocery store, and the carts were blowing all over the parking lot. I almost fell over several times, and it was nearly impossible to hear anyone talking outside. I would estimate that the winds were probably hitting somewhere around 25 miles per hour. The trees were swaying so hard that I often thought they were about to break. Anyway, it was completely dark by the time I got home. What was worse was that the wind was so strong that it knocked the power out in my neighborhood. All the houses were dark. The street lights were out, and it was cold and creepy. The howling of the wind was so loud that it was really the only thing that I heard. I used the light of my cell phone to find a lantern, which I lit. I wasn't sure what to do with myself, but I knew there really wasn't much that I could do. I thought I'd spend the night reading a book until hopefully the power came back on. It was creepy sitting there reading, hearing the wind moaning outside. I lived alone, so I was by myself, in a completely dark house, in a completely dark neighborhood. I feel weird admitting this, but I actually was enjoying the fact that I was a little bit scared. When I was reading, I then heard a loud crashing sound in my kitchen. I jumped. I had a big tree in my backyard, and there were branches right by one of the kitchen windows. I thought that maybe the wind was blowing the branches so hard that the window shattered. I groaned, and got up to walk to the kitchen and check it out. When I stood up, though, I had the shock of my life. The whole house was dark, except for my lantern, which was by me. But standing in the kitchen doorway was the silhouette of a rather large man. He didn't move at first, just stood there and looked at me. I couldn't make out any of his features because it was so dark. The guy took a step towards me, and I reacted instinctively. I picked up the lantern and held it as if I was going to throw it at him. He paused. I made some comment about him getting out of my damn house, unless he wanted to be caught on fire. At first he didn't react. He definitely did not respond. It was hell waiting there for what seemed like an eternity, but was most likely just a few seconds. Then, quicker than I had ever seen a human being move, he ducked back into the kitchen. I sprinted over to the doorway, just in time to see him exiting the window, the one he had likely came in through. I called the police. It took forever for them to come out. I guess it was busy that night because of the windstorm. They figured, and I assumed they were right, that the guy was just a burglar who was trying to take advantage of the power outage. Still, it was a scary as hell experience. Number 3. Rainstorm. My scariest experience happened when I was 13 years old. For the first time ever, I had to remain home from school due to an illness. It sucked. I had gotten perfect attendance awards my entire life, and this getting sick just screwed it up. Both of my parents worked, and they really couldn't afford to take off and remain home with me. Also, because I was 13, they agreed I was old enough to be home by myself. I remember this day more because of how it was raining. It wasn't a thunderstorm or anything like that, but it was raining, and raining very hard. My bedroom was on the second floor of the house, and the noise of the rain hitting the roof was so loud that I couldn't concentrate. So I decided to go down to the living room and watch some television. While I was watching TV, I heard the doorbell ring. I decided to just ignore it at first. My parents were never home during this time of day, and normally I wasn't either, so I couldn't imagine that it was anything important. But whoever was ringing the doorbell kept ringing it over and over again. It was actually very annoying. This went on for about 5 minutes. Finally it stopped. I was relieved that I could just listen to my TV show. As I was sitting there, something caught my attention. I saw some movement out of the corner of my eye. Glancing over, I started when I noticed that someone was looking in my living room window. When he saw me, he quickly left. I was again a bit relieved at first, but then the doorbell began ringing again. And this time it was ringing constantly. He kept hitting the doorbell button again and again and again. "I know you're in there," I heard the guy calling. "It's raining really hard out here. Let me in." I went over to the window that he had previously looked in and closed the blinds. I went back over to the couch. The guy didn't let up on the doorbell ringing. He kept calling for me over and over again to open the door. When I didn't respond to him, rather than simply asking for me to open the door, he told me that if I didn't, that I would regret it. After he said that, he then stopped ringing the doorbell. I thought he had left again, but then I heard him pounding on the door. Then he began ringing the doorbell and pounding on the door. After a few moments, he began yelling at me again, while ringing the doorbell and pounding on the door. Well, I couldn't take it anymore. I'd been hoping he would just leave, but it became obvious that he was not going to. I grabbed the phone and dialed 911. Almost exactly when I heard the doorbell and pounding stop, I also heard the siren of a police car on its way. The guy was arrested after trying to run from the police. My parents were called, and they both came home from work. The man had several knives on his person. He also apparently had several warrants out for his arrest, and he went to jail. Now, there was never any chance that I would have opened that door. But often, I think back on this rainy day, and I wonder what might have happened if I had. And I shudder.